Hello and welcome to Cafe DC. This is Faiz Rahman. Today our guest is Special Representative to the Muslim communities, Farah Pandit. She works at the State Department and soon retiring. Well, thank you very much for being with us today and on a very short notice. Let's just start with your background.
Sure.
You were born in Kashmir,
Yep.
Srinagar,
Yep.
and then as a child, as a very little child, you came here to this country, and rest is just history. You have done, mashallah, very well
Thank you.
for yourself and for the community. So please tell us about your mission. What is it about being a special representative for the Muslim communities around the world? What it means? I'm sure it's a very new, when it was established, it was just a new concept. And a lot of people outside this country don't know what exactly you do.
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much for sitting down with me and chatting with me on my last few days here at the Department of State. And I have to say, when I look at the trajectory of the importance of public service by all Americans of different faiths and different heritages, it is very important we look at the broad spectrum of the way in which people who are American give back. For me, that journey, as you just said, enveloped many different paths, and I have been very lucky to, at two different times in my life, serve in government. One right out of college, and then in between 10 years working in the private sector and going to graduate school, but then also coming back after our country was attacked. And so joining our government in 2003 as a political appointee and working on issues that have to do with a post 9/11 world has been a remarkable experience. This is one of the most important journeys I think I could have taken from a foreign policy perspective, because having had the chance of seeing how policy is made from different perches. I worked at USAID, where I could see how humanitarian and economic aid impacted communities on the
I think
ground.
that was your first stint in the government, right?
Well,
At
for
USAID?
two different times, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Right out of college, I worked at USAID.
And that was the Bush Senior's time.
Yes,
right?
it was Bush Senior's time. And I have to say, let's just pause there for a minute, because I think it talks a lot about our country. I was president of the student body in college, and my senior year gave a speech about the importance of diversity. And with my good fortune, and I feel very blessed by this,
Barbara Bush
the First Lady of the United States, heard me speak. She was on the stage with me, and the White House called the day after I gave that speech, and they said,
And if I'm not wrong,
Yeah.
actually, sorry for the
No, not at
interruption. She actually took your speech.
Yes.
She requested a copy
Yeah.
of your speech, and she was
right,
so
and I mean,
impressed
this is
with-
pre-internet. This is sort of
1989.
1989, the fall of 1989. I'm faxing my speech back to the White House, and she started quoting me. And so my senior year in college was a correspondence between me as a senior in college and the First Lady of the United States, where, by the way, she was handwriting notes back to me.
Well, you mentioned anti-Americanism around
Yeah.
the world, and in different words, but
Yes.
that's what it is. And when you started, it was at back then all-time high. But through your work, have you seen any difference? I mean, it's still in Pakistan and other Muslim countries. The numbers, the figures are just terrible.
So it's a really important thing that you're asking, and I think as somebody who has now served three presidents, both Democrats and Republicans in the Oval Office. I served under President Bush. I'm very fortunate and happy to be serving under President Obama. But people are measuring the sentiment in all kinds of ways. You see polls left and right about who hates us and how popular we are, and will they accept United States help here but not here. I think you have to look at the broad spectrum of ideology that is out there and understand it is not about one country. It isn't about what community said 85% of them are saying this versus 20% saying that. It is not like that. So in this job over the course of the last 5 years, what I have been asked to do is to go around the world and to see and communicate with people on the ground. And so I hear what they have to say about our country and the conspiracy theories and these ideas that they have about who we are as Americans. It is important as a U.S. government official that I debunk things that are not accurate, that if people don't believe we have the rights that we have in our Constitution, that I talk about that. I think that there's been a great help in the fact that I am somebody who was not born in America, that came to this country as a baby, that grew up able to practice my faith freely, to be able to talk about America as a place that from the perspective of Muslims, this is the most diverse group of Muslims anywhere in the world.
Absolutely.
And that you can live with your faith proudly in this country, and that there are mosques and synagogues and temples and churches side by side in our nation. Now, that's not just sort of a talking point. That's the way we live here in America. And so when you go into communities that say, well, could you say to someone, I am Muslim and still get hired? Of course you can. Can you wear a headscarf, or can you wear whatever it happens to be, whether it's a turban or a bindi or a cross or a yarmulke on your head, and be a proud American? Of course you can. Those are the rights that are embedded into our Constitution, and it allows that.
What were the issues that you faced? I mean, what were their comments, like, why they were so against the whole idea?
So there are many. I mean, there are different buckets I could put in.
And do you think all of them are baseless, or there were some?
No, I don't. Look, sentiment comes from emotion, and it is a very important thing for us to look at the moment we are in time, when you are not able to contain the story. The story is a story that happens on somebody's smartphone that they see with a swish of their finger. It is in a tweet. It is in a viral video. It is in a song. It is not just the news written or on TV. It is pieces that are pulled together. What I will say to you is that there is a consistent powerhouse mechanism of an ideology that is pushing hard to make people believe that there is an us and that there is a them. And that violent ideology and that hateful ideology injects poison into communities in different ways. So what are the kinds of things that people are talking about? Well, one bucket happens to be misperceptions about America, and that's something we've just talked about. And I can talk about the Constitution, and I can talk about what it's like to be a Muslim in this country, and also, all kinds of other things about America. Okay, so that's one bucket. There's a lot of misperception in that bucket, by the way, because there's a problem often in terms of translation. I don't mean literal translation, I just mean the West. Mm-hmm. So when you see something happening in Australia or in France or in Belgium, oftentimes people say that means it's the same thing as America because it's the West.
I mean, there's a term for this, Gora stuff. Everything is like,
So it's not all the same. Mm-hmm. And it's very offensive to think that, even within a country. I mean, you mentioned Pakistan.
But how do you address, some of very prominent, very conspicuous contradictions in U.S. policy? So, I mean, there is truth to it. People have legitimate concerns when they see, on the one hand, you going abroad, talking to these girls, these children. You have beautiful pictures plastered all over the walls. I mean, in those countries and here too. But at the same time, America has been involved in stuff which is not, even per our own president's words, not being very, so to speak, laudatory. So, we cannot be very proud of those moments. So how do you address those issues?
So one bucket is sort of the misperceptions about America. Another bucket is certainly foreign policy. And when you talk about the sentiment that's happening in communities, whether they're communities in Buenos Aires, or they're communities in Stockholm, or they're communities in Rabat, or they're communities in Jakarta, there's a prevalent conversation, and I want to say that my work is focused on young people. So I'm hearing this a lot, even from the younger generation. I focus on young people under the age of 30.
Young generation. Muslims, they're very politicized.
Well, that's why I'm saying to you. So when we open up that bucket, sort of foreign policy, what are the kinds of things that come forward? There is a lot of discussion about politics. Okay. And that comes in a lot of different shapes. It can be our policy on Guantanamo. It can be our policy on drones. It can be our policy on the environment. I hear it all. I hear, by the way, our policy on LGBT. I hear all the different grievances or non-grievances that communities have in the concept of sort of policy, and some is domestic, some is foreign. They want to understand it. They want to push back. But here's what's really important. Our country doesn't make policy based on religion. We do not look at a country and say,
but what difference does it make?
Yeah. It does make a difference, because a perception is a perception. And so when you ask me how do I respond, A young person, for example, will pick up and listen and re-quote something that they see on their smartphone. This is what they saw on Google. Sheikh Google doesn't know it all. Okay, they don't go beyond the first thing that comes up, and they see these things that are written in blogs and whatnot, and they think it's truth. And they also buy into the as I talked about, this sort of machine that's going forward in terms of advocating anything that happens in the world pivots towards a very structured debate of, look, see, America hates Muslims. And so see, because the sky is blue today, America hates Muslims. Yes, there is some legitimacy. Of course, you ask that question. Every person has an emotion when they see challenging things happen on the ground, of course. And you may too have a very strong opinion about a particular thing that America is doing. But we are not a country that is going out making policy based on, this is a Christian majority country and this is a Muslim majority country.
But
that isn't
that's
the way
not
we
part
work.
of the debate at all.
It is
I mean,
actually part of the debate, because you know why? Because young people often say to me, you are doing this here, they give whatever example, because you hate Muslims. So you may not hear it, but I have heard it all over the world.
Well, okay, so we have to take a short break here.
Sure.
He's been asking me to take a break, so once we come back, we'll go a little bit, into other areas. When you came back, I think at the White House, what did you do there? And then finally at the State Department.
Sure.
All right, good.
Sure.
So we'll be right back. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. Thank you. Each week here at Cafe DC, I go one-on-one. Politicians, literary giants, activists, power brokers, and many more from different walks of life. And focusing on what matters is my cup of, shall we say, coffee. Matters that make a difference in the society. Watch me, Faiz Rahman, on Cafe DC, every week only on PTV World. Welcome back, and right back to you, ma'am. So basically then, yes, of course, there are issues and everything, but when you came back to the government, actually you went to a more important place, the White House, the National Security Council. So what was your job there? Again, it was Muslim-oriented. I think it did
Yes.
have a title. So what did you do there? And again, the challenges, I would like to, and I'm sure my viewers, they also like to listen to the challenges that you faced and how, as a young woman, handled those issues. How did you respond to those challenges?
So I think it's important to take a step back and remember what the global sort of passion was, what was on the front pages of papers, how were media talking about the issues that were happening right after 9/11. I came to the White House in 2004, and I worked there for 3 years, focusing on what was happening with Muslims. And I was faced with many challenges, of course. What is the threat that's out there? How do you prevent that threat? What are things that should be, what should we be doing? How do we look and how do we find credible voices that can push back against the violent ideology from Al-Qaeda and others? We clearly understood, and obviously your viewers understand too, there's a difference between the religion of Islam and those who will use that religion or claim it for their own, for their violent ends. Huge difference. How do you formulate a way forward where you're obviously separating any kind of perception on that, but also getting into the place where you can, how do you reinstitute a framework to counter violent extremism? How do you explain it? How do you talk about it? What is the threat? How are you understanding what's happening globally, not just within a particular region? These were all the issues we were looking at, and we were injecting in that initiatives that we thought would help lift up civil society to be able to speak. One of the pieces that I was working on a lot are, where are the actors out there that can not do what the United States is telling them to say, but to sort of find ways to bring their voices forward. So how are you manifesting that? So both domestically and internationally, looking at that, there was a lot of mistrust. It was not easy sailing at all, but it was so important for me to understand what needed to be done. And that is actually the pivot, some of the highlights of my time there, really working with a very small, the team at the NSC was quite quite small. It's much smaller than it is now. So as a director at the NSC, had a chance to see things and sort of move them forward to the president. I worked for an incredible man who listened and cared a lot about these issues, and Elliott Abrams and I, really, I feel very privileged to have worked for him. I remember a time when I was very early on at the White House, I was in the White House library for some reason before an event, and I was looking on the shelf and I saw, different faith books, and I thought, well, where is the Quran? And there was no Quran. And I told Elliott, there's no Quran. And he said, well, make it happen. And so we alerted the president, there's no Quran in the White House library. And
even though Quran has been in the White House since the times of Thomas Jefferson. Yeah?
Of course, Thomas Jefferson had his own personal Quran, which is a very important part of U.S. history, by the way. But it actually triggered for me this understanding that, do we even understand the role of presidents, Islam, and diplomacy? And so that carried a seed with me forward. I feel very fortunate to have catalyzed the action, but
and
President
we're
Bush
talking about George Bush's times, right? I mean, that was the White House. Sorry, let me ask you one question. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all.
Of course, you are dealing outside. I mean, with the communities outside this country.
Yes.
I mean, you were more concerned with the foreign policy and foreign issues, but at the same time, there were domestic issues with Islam. I mean, Islam's been here for a long time, very strong presence, but there are still some groups who are quote unquote Islamophobes. They've been termed by the Muslim groups as such. There were other incidents, articles written against a Muslim community here. Some of the mosques were affected by those actions. So how did you deal with because I'm sure it became part of your job as well, because you had to respond to those outside this country for whatever was going on here in this country. So how did you deal with that?
So it's very delicate, right? So you're looking at a time when people are, exposed to a religion through a very bizarre way because a terrorist group is claiming it as their own, and trying to unpack it, trying to explain it, and to also understand the history of Americans who happen to be Muslim. And so that's why I said that these pieces, the Quran, that one of the founding fathers of our country had a Quran in his personal library that was so important that President Bush put one in the White House library, that we began to talk about things as a legacy piece of American presidents. In fact, one of the first things that I did as special representative in the Obama administration was to build off of what I had seen, which is we don't have enough knowledge. Islam came to America at the time of the slaves. It has been here since our country began. So when you get these crazy voices that are out there shrieking, voices in America, in Europe, around the world that claim a particular thing, you go back to history and you say, but look at what happened. You talk about the fact that President Eisenhower realized that there was no mosque in Washington, D.C., and when the Turkish ambassador died and needed to be buried, there was no place for him. And the President of the United States gave land to the Muslim community in Washington, D.C., so that they could build a mosque, which is why we have the mosque on Massachusetts Avenue.
Center, yes.
These are pieces of our history, our American history, that are not embedded into the way we think about things. So if you look at this conversation, a crazy guy like Terry Jones claiming something just a few years ago, whose name is ricocheting around the world, because while Americans have forgotten this pastor in Florida, many communities around the world have not. So the way we as Americans understand our history and Islam in our history is really critical, which is why the timeline's important, that we have the historic evidence, but because we also need to talk about how, whether or not you're a president that is a Republican or a Democrat, we have lifted up the narrative and we have always been respectful to the American Muslim communities in our country, and we have many different kinds of communities here. President Obama was a historic first in stepping on the steps of the Capitol in his inauguration speech in January 2009, speaking in his inauguration, saying to Muslims around the world, I want to build stronger relationships with you. I mean, that is part of our narrative as well. So I think the historic piece helps to rebut some of the ideology and the craziness that people put out there to say that our country is doing X, Y, or Z, because you can go back and say, but this is who we are and this is what presidents have done and said.
Well, do you think America we know the history, and you have done remarkably well, like in basically compiling this research, Precious Muhammad, and then other papers that have come out, Thomas Jefferson's Quran.
Of course.
Do you think America has done good enough to communicate with the world outside about its Islamic history, the presence of Islam here?
I think that there's a lot to be done, but it's a two-way street. There is a role that Americans have to play in understanding their own history. And that is very important. We need to expose this history to Americans. We also need to understand that the rest of the world, too, needs to understand our history as well. You bring up something that's very important, and I come face to face with that when I talk to communities of young people all over the world who say, but nobody understands us, and nobody understands Muslims, and nobody's asking the right questions. And I ask of them, what do you know about other faiths and other countries? So when they say to me, we're growing up in an era where everybody's, and they are, every day since September 12th, 2001, they have seen the word Islam or Muslim on the front page of a paper, online and offline. No other generation in history has had to deal with that. How do you think about identity and how people are thinking about you with that kind of framework? And so they say people are looking at us differently. They think about us differently. You called it Islamophobe. It's terminology I don't usually use, but people who are anti-Muslim, whatever is happening. I agree. There's a lot that has to be done. But I also would ask that the communities out there say, what do I know about Christianity? What do I know about Judaism? And stop listening to the loudest voices that say something, but to learn for themselves what is actually real and what is actually part of the mechanism that wants you to hate.
I'm sure politics affects your work a lot.
Of course.
So again, he's asking for a small, short break.
Sure.
When we come back, I would like to basically touch upon a little bit. You don't have to go into the nitty-gritty of the politics, but how do those issues affect your work outside? So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Each week here at Cafe DC, I go one-on-one. Politicians, literary giants, activists, power brokers, and many more from different walks of life. And focusing on what matters is my cup of, shall we say, coffee. Matters that make a difference in the society. Watch me, Faiz Rahman, on Cafe DC every week only on PTV World.
Welcome back. Okay, we were talking about the impact of politics and political issues on your work and your mandate. But because we are in the last leg of our program, so I just wanted to touch upon your very near departure from a state. And Secretary Kerry, actually, he issued a statement. I was personally very proud to see this statement about you and your services to the State Department and America and the American government in general. So once you answer my question about politics, I would like you to go into a little bit where you want to be, why you're leaving at such an early stage. You've been here only for 10 years in the government.
Only in 10 years, Seth,
and as a political appointee, so politics first.
So you asked whether or not politics affect my work. Of course, the daily onslaught of current events affect my work. So you can be in a country engaging, doing things with communities, and something terrible is happening that is going to sort of transpire in such a way that the conversation won't be what you expected it to be, or people are urgently interested in watching something happen between a president and another part of the world. These things happen all the time, and you have to be aware that is happening. But my job has been to engage with young people on a people-to-people level around the world. And so we can talk about politics, which is part of the piece, but mostly young people are really interested in getting their voices out there and being connected and being part of these platforms, of being really interested in the things that we have seeded.
How do you help those young people I mean, outside this country who want to just express themselves?
Well, my job is outside of this country. So it is finding, first of all, talent scouting, going deep and going wide and getting to know a whole host of different kinds of voices, not just going to the same kinds of people that we've always gone to before. Talking to bloggers, talking to social entrepreneurs, talking to musicians, talking to faith leaders, talking to everybody in between. I had great conversations with graffiti artists in Bahrain, for example, who were expressing themselves through, art. All of these people are part of civil society and their voices matter. So we've got to do the job, and we are doing that hand in glove with our embassies, who are getting to know a new generation of young people so that they can hear them. Once you get to know them, you're connecting their voices with others around the world because they have common interests.
Social media has
Social
helped
media
you?
has helped in a very big way. Using technology, it has been very much a part of this. And exposing the kinds of conversations I'm having with young people, it's part of what I do. It's sort of opening things up. And what I've done, I hope, is given some insight to the world on what Muslims are saying around the world, whether you're in the Maldives or whether you're in Suriname, whether you're in Canada. This is what's happening, and talking about the diversity of Muslim voices around the world, because giving dignity to all these voices is really important, that we're not just looking at one country or one region, that we understand that Muslims live in every part of the world and they deserve respect.
Well, I mean, one terrible problem, especially in Pakistan, which is affecting a lot of young children, is the polio issue. I mean, polio has been, the government of Pakistan, they're trying to campaign so that people can vaccinate their children, but there've been a lot of issues.
Yep.
How did you deal with that issue? Actually, is it part of your?
I have not personally been working on that issue. There are colleagues in other parts of the Department of State and the interagency who are, and we've done a lot to work with organizations like the OIC and others and other partners around the world to, in fact, do more around that issue. Polio affects Muslim communities in a great way. Polio shouldn't exist on the planet today in 2014, but it does. So you're right, it's a very complex thing because there are a lot of poisonous, incorrect myths that are out there that are preventing parents from vaccinating their children.
And now, Carrie's letter.
Yes.
And your departure. So you're moving on to Harvard, and next week you'll be in a different city, under a different weather, so hopefully better than Washington, at least next week. So yeah, what are your plans, and why you're moving to Harvard?
Well, it's been an absolute honor, to serve my country. And we talked at the beginning of this about the fact that I've had a chance to work for 2 presidents as a political appointee, which is a very rare thing. I'm a very rare animal in terms of that. But I think my issues have been across the board. It is not a Republican issue. It is not a Democratic issue. It is an issue that is important for our country to engage with 1/4 of humanity, and that is what we're doing. So it's been a joy and an honor and a pleasure to work for a nation I love so much. And I feel very honored to be going to the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School at Harvard, where I will be a fellow there, be able to interface with young people, which is what I've been doing, but in a very different way, to share the ideas that I've seen from this generation. But I also, very importantly, want to be able to catalyze these ideas in new ways. And so I'm hoping to write a book about what I've seen in the post 9/11 era, about what's happening to Muslims around the world from their voice.
Expand your horizon.
Expand
and knowing you, can I predict that you'll be back here in Washington maybe in the next administration?
I don't predict anything. When I came to Washington in 2003, I thought I was going to be here for a couple of years, and it turned into more than a decade. But I appreciate your interest, and I hope that the viewers of your program understand that the issues that we are seeing around the world have reshaped and manifested in different ways, but that there is a role that each of them and each of us can play in pushing back against the stereotypes and the sound bites, push back against the violent extremist ideology, and to give attention to this generation that is doing so much, and we owe it to them to allow them to build a planet that is not faced with the framework that we have been dealing with for the last decade.
Special Representative Farah Pandith, thank you very much for talking to us. It was a great pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So this was our interview with Farah Pandith, the Special Representative to the Muslim communities. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Cafe DC. Please don't forget to visit our website www.urduvoa.com. Thank you very much for joining us today.